All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Limeade webinar on employee engagement and what it looks like at work. We are just going to get started right away. It is 10 o'clock, so we're going to jump in. So a few housekeeping items here right at the beginning. This is going to be a great conversation about some of our research and some of these great concepts today. So I hope that there will be a lot of questions, and if you do have any questions, please type them into the chat functionality. And we will have about 5 to 10 minutes at the end for open Q&A. So hopefully we can get to everyone's questions. In addition, you'll receive the slides and the recording in a follow-up email later today as well. So today we're just going to be walking through these concepts. What is employee engagement? What does it look like at work? What is this concept of organizational support that's so critical? And then we're just going to walk through a few real-life scenarios as well. And excited to be speaking with you. My name is Nick Momolo. I'm a solution architect here at Limeade, really focused on the solutions that we bring to our customers, the user experience, and the product overall. But the star of today's show is sitting right across from me, Dr. Laura Hamill, who is Chief People Officer here at Limeade, as well as the Director of our Limeade Institute. Laura has 20+ years of experience in organizational psychology. We're very lucky to have her, and she's driving some really critical research for us here at Limeade. So thank you for being with us, Laura.
Thank you so much, Nick. This is awesome.
Absolutely. We're excited to walk through some concepts with you today.
Absolutely.
So before we start, I know that we have a lot of different definitions and concepts that we're going to be talking about. So I wanted to just take a few minutes to get on the same page here and really define employee engagement, what we mean by that, and why it's such an important topic for us. So would you mind just walking through that?
Absolutely. That sounds great. So let's begin. Hi, everybody. This is Laura. I think it's really important for us to really understand the definition of employee engagement from a research perspective. There's actually a lot of research on the topic of employee engagement and some pretty concrete definitions. So the definition that we use at Limeade is based on research, and we define it as this deep connection and sense of purpose at work. And those things together create extra energy and extra commitment. It's really those people who you can see who are all in. They're excited to come to work. They just have this enthusiasm about them. People who are engaged are really interesting because they identify so deeply with their work that they try to solve problems that are bigger than their jobs. They really don't think about things in terms of, that's not part of my job. They are so connected. They're trying to solve company-wide big problems. They really tend to be people who work across silos, they work across boundaries. They also take a lot of initiative because they care so deeply about the work. They take initiative to make things happen, and they really push through obstacles when they have them. So they're really different looking than people who aren't engaged. People who aren't engaged are those people who are really waiting for somebody to tell them what to do. They're kind of sitting there, and they're a little bit more of the kind of mindset of, well, that's actually not my job, or that term you've heard before, that's not in my job description, right? Somebody who's engaged would not say that, right? They very much, people who aren't engaged tend to think about their jobs kind of in a box, and it's just, something they come to every day. It's not a way that they feel deeply connected. So this feeling is a really good feeling, to feel connected, to feel a sense of purpose at work. And so it's good for an individual employee. I think we all know when we've been in those jobs where we felt that, it feels good. Time flies by. You feel like you matter. And so it's really good for an employee to feel that way, and it's also really great for organizations.
Sure.
So one of the things that's really important about this concept, I think the word energy really stands out. It's this, as I was talking about all those things, there's a feeling of energy and enthusiasm and action that's really behind this concept of employee engagement. And it's really different from job satisfaction. Sometimes I see people thinking that they're talking about employee engagement, but they're really talking about job satisfaction. And what job satisfaction is, it's more of an evaluation of my work conditions, right? Looking at my, I like my manager, or my benefits are pretty good, or my team, I like them, right? That's more what job satisfaction is evaluating and kind of the level of contentment with the things that are around me. And that's not what employee engagement is. Employee engagement probably requires some of that at the baseline, but what we're talking about is what happens on top of that, that energy, that connection that makes people just go above and beyond. So I think it's really important to kind of think about employee engagement around this idea of action and energy.
So it sounds like engagement's very different from just participation in a job.
Well, yeah, and in the well-being or wellness space especially, we tend to talk about engagement in terms of participation, right? We say we want people to be engaged in our program or engaged in our software, and that's participation, right? What we're talking about with employee engagement is at a completely different level. And that's why we use the term like real employee engagement or true employee engagement. It's some energy that's so much more, it's just really different from basic participation. And you can see it, you know it when you see it, right? When people have that extra energy with their jobs. So one of the things I think that's kind of interesting about this idea of engagement is the concept of levels of engagement. What we typically talk about is this idea of being really engaged with your work. That's the pretty classic or traditional way of thinking about employee engagement, is how connected I am with the work I do every day. But there are other levels of engagement that tend to be in an employee engagement survey and also important. You can think about these different levels working together to kind of create a total amount of engagement. So think about how engaged you are with your team. Do you feel connected to them? Do you care for them? Like even, sometimes we talk about loving people who are around us, who we work with, right? So how connected do you feel to the people around you at work? How connected do you feel to the company, right? Do you feel like what we're doing is so important, it means something to me deeply? Or could you take it or leave it, right? And then there's this concept of a higher purpose. Do you feel like the work that you do is so important that you connect with it so much that it almost could be, you could do it anywhere in some ways. So there's these different levels of engagement I think are pretty important for us to understand.
So Laura, if you're leading a company in HR, which one would you optimize for out of these different levels here?
Yeah, I think I would probably start with work. Because I think that's where most organizations have the most ability to control what work looks like, how much autonomy somebody has in their job, how much of a sense of growth and development they have in their job. Organizations can really do something about that. It's a little bit harder to change, what the company does, kind of the whole business model for the company, right? And it's definitely harder to change higher purpose. Work, the day-to-day work and how engaged somebody feels with the day-to-day work is something that's just so core and so fundamental that I think it's important to start there. All right. So why do we care about all this? Well, I hope you care about it because you'll like that feeling, right? We know that it feels really good to be engaged, but there's a lot of really good business reasons for us to care about employee engagement. Mostly that an engaged workforce means better business results. So there's been study after study. In fact, so many studies now that I think it's sort of a truism in HR that it's just better to have an engaged workforce. So we know that when you have an engaged workforce, you're more likely to have things like higher stock price growth. You tend to be more profitable, more productive, employees are less likely to have a safety incident when they're engaged. We also know that things like patient satisfaction, quality of care have been proven through research to be better when you have engaged employees. Customer satisfaction, customer loyalty has been studied. Retention, your employees stay longer in your organization when they're engaged. So there's been so many different studies to really connect this concept of employee engagement with business results. So one of the ways that we try to talk about these concepts is through something we call the great company model. And the idea is that you really have to care about people as people and invest in their well-being first. So we really look at employee engagement through the lens of well-being. So we've found that there's some really important connections between well-being and employee engagement. And when you have those two things together, again, the business results follow, but you really are more of a great place to work. You're a great company when you invest in well-being in your core. So this is just a little tiny piece of the research that we've done around the statistical connection between well-being and employee engagement. what we have found in our research is that when you actually look at the well-being, and in this case, we had about 1,300 participants, and we put people into two groups, people who had high well-being and people who had low well-being. And when you look to see what their results look like on employee engagement items, something really interesting shows up. So what we found here is that for a whole set of employee engagement items, those people with higher well-being were 88% favorable, and those people who had lower well-being were 50% favorable. And that is a statistically significant difference between those two groups. Now, that's a roll-up of all the engagement items. When you look at the items that are underneath it, it's really interesting. Those with higher well-being like their work more. They're more loyal to their team. They're more likely to say they're going to stay in the organization. They're more likely to recommend their company as a great place to work, just to give you a flavor of a few of the differences. And again, those are all statistically significantly different. Now, what's interesting and important is that we're not the only ones who found these relationships. Gallup also has over and over again seen this kind of interesting relationship between well-being and engagement. Lots of other consulting firms too have. So there does seem to be something interesting here. Now, what I would argue is we probably wouldn't say that it's causal necessarily, that well-being causes engagement. But what I would say is that it's important because engagement can also help with your well-being, right? So if you feel really good about your work, if you feel that connection with your work, you're more likely to feel like you have well-being in your life too, right? And so it really isn't, I wouldn't go as far as saying causal because I think it goes both ways, but I think there's something that's really important here between these two things. Also the idea that if you don't have well-being in your life, it's really hard to sustain engagement. It's really hard to keep that level of energy up when you haven't been taking care of yourself and when you feel like maybe the organization hasn't helped you take care of yourself. So that's one of the kind of last ideas I wanted to share is this concept of organizational support. So this is a model that we developed, and it was based on existing empirical research, the perceived organizational support literature. And what we did is we basically took it and applied it to the topic of well-being. So what has to happen in an organization for an employee to feel supported? So these are the 8 components that we've done some research around, and we found that all 8 of them actually are statistically related to overall perceptions of organizational support and to well-being. So that sounds a little academic, I bet, but the idea here is that there's something important in these 8 components. In order for an employee to feel like an organization cares about them as a person, there's a lot that needs to happen. It's not as simple as buying a software program. It's not as simple as having a really great well-being program. It has to come to life and be very consistently supported throughout the whole organization. So, how does a manager talk to an employee about well-being? What is the physical work environment like? Is it conducive to well-being or does it work against it? What about the leaders of the organization? Do they send mixed messages about caring about their employees? So all these 8 things together really are important to create a really authentic way of supporting your employees.
This is fascinating, Laura. I think this is really interesting research and interesting concepts really for any business leader within an organization, not just a chief human resource officer, for example. So what I want to do now is really help bring this to life and go through a couple scenarios that might make these concepts more actionable as well. So first scenario here, we've been talking with a lot of healthcare companies and organizations and hospitals. And one concept that keeps coming up over and over again is this idea of burnout, and especially related to physician burnout. So, imagine that you're a physician, Laura, and you're very engaged with your work. You've gone to school for years and years in order to perform this role, but it's also a very high stress environment and a high stress job. So how do we identify burnout with that type of population or just in general? And what can an organization do to combat that?
Yeah, it's such an interesting topic, right? I think everybody can kind of relate to the idea of burnout. Maybe a lot of people have been in those situations, sure, right, where you feel like you're depleted, you're overcommitted, you just can't keep doing what you've been doing. And I think that's why it's such an interesting topic. people relate to it, but they don't know, organizations haven't done a lot to really systemically address it. And so the reason why I think we should care so deeply about burnout is that those people who burn out actually have to be engaged in order for them to be burnout, right? So they have to be, we could kind of use this idea, they have to be on fire in order to burn out. And so they have to have that connection in order to get to this place of burnout. So these people who we care deeply about because they care so much about our organizations, they're the ones who are at risk for burnout. And burnout is really this idea that you have been so into your work, you've given your work your all for so long that you become just completely exhausted, right? You're overworked, you're depleted. Now, what's sad is not only is it that you're exhausted, but that exhaustion ends up turning into cynicism. So people who are in kind of the process of burning out start to become negative about the organization, negative about their customers or their patients in the physician example, and very kind of detached. They tend to objectify their customers or objectify the patients in their work. And so that cynicism starts happening, and then after that, people start to feel like, what's the point? I'm not making a difference. I don't feel effective anymore. So as you can imagine, if you're starting to feel cynical and ineffective, there's sort of this negative kind of tone to that almost in some cases toxicity that happens around you. And then that's when organizations sort of start dismissing people and say they're not high performers, right? And that to me is what's really sad, because those people are the ones who started out hyper engaged, caring so deeply for so long, giving everything, and then we sort of dismiss what happens to them and think they've got some personal issues, right? Where really it's the organization and the things that have happened in the organization that have caused this kind of burnout. So I think it's a really important topic, and one that we've been actually studying in Limeade Institute. And so what we're trying to do is really, how do you get to that early, right? Before somebody's already at the point of being, cynical and feeling ineffective. How do you get to that a little bit early? So one of the things, some of the really cool research that Julia Tillman on my team has done is look at the relationship between employee engagement and stress. And one of the findings that she found in her study was that those employees who had the highest level of employee engagement actually reported the lowest levels of stress. I thought that was fascinating, right? Because think about people who are really engaged at work. Again, there's an energy about them, right? They're excited. They look like they're running around. They've got a lot of things going.
Sure.
And so those people actually could look like they're the most stressed. But when you're engaged, you tend to not think about it as stressful. I think it's when you're really engaged, you maybe have more of a mindset of, I get to do these things. I'm excited about doing those things. I can't wait to go to work to kind of tackle these things, right? So it's not, you don't think about it maybe so much as being stressful. So what we're trying to do is look at those people who are in the early signs when they're engaged, but they're starting to say, I'm stressed. So we're using that as an indicator of early signs of burnout.
Interesting. You have to be on fire to burn out. I love that. That's a great visual there. So kind of connecting maybe some of the consequences of burnout, concept of turnover.
Yeah.
I think of a highly competitive job market or an industry, here in Seattle or down in Silicon Valley, where competition among tech companies is really high for the right type of talent. And we know from working with some of our high-tech customers that the cost of replacement for a senior software engineer can be upwards of $400,000. Obviously, a huge impact on a business's bottom line. So how can we combat turnover? How can we reduce it and identify that before it starts as well?
That's a really good question. And I hear you. It has such a big impact. I would very much go back to employee engagement, right? To me, we've seen over and over again that employee engagement, when your workforce is engaged, you have less turnover. So it's really important to connect your turnover issue with the employee engagement drivers. And so there are lots of different drivers that actually go into making an engaged workforce. But some of them, I thought that I could just share with you here. This is some of the research we did in Limeade Institute around the strongest drivers of employee engagement. And so what's tricky, I think, people want a magic bullet, right? They want one thing. Just tell me the one thing to do. And it's not one one thing. It really is. There's a series of things that need to happen. But if you look at what's on this list, I think it's pretty interesting. There are things here, again, about this feeling of being energized by your work. There's also this idea of feeling valued, feeling respected, really feeling like I identify with my work. I get to contribute to something that matters. My work has purpose. So there's a lot about that connection and how we really build that connection for people to have in their jobs. On the right-hand side, you can see also there's some interesting things here about this idea of stress and how I spend my time at work. We tend not to talk about that in employee engagement, traditional employee engagement surveys. We don't really tend to talk about this level of stress because there really is a sweet spot of stress. And that is optimal for employee engagement. And then at the bottom, there's more about this idea of organizational support, right? How do I feel? Do I feel like my manager cares about me? Are they looking out for me? And overall, does the organization really support me? So there's a lot to it, but I think that more organizations that can be really thoughtful about these different drivers, they will be able to influence turnover.
So obviously not everyone turns over for the same reason, but we've talked about, maybe highly educated, highly paid roles where the sense of job purpose is really tied to the role itself.
Yeah.
But what about, a role that might be as equally as important to an organization, like a retail sales associate or someone that works in a call center, where job purpose isn't as readily identifiable?
Right.
How do you make everyone in an organization, regardless of their role, feel heard and included and valued?
Yeah, you're right. I mean, I think it is sort of sad in some ways that we tend to think about physicians and tech jobs when we're talking about the idea of engagement. And really any job, any role, we should strive that they should be engaged. And I think it's in some ways a cop-out for us to think about certain roles. We would never expect them to be engaged at work. That's just not true. You've heard those stories about that amazing person who's working the cash register who feels so connected to making sure that their customers have amazing experiences, right? You've heard about the janitors who feel such a sense of purpose that they just go above and beyond for all of the patients in a hospital, for example. So it really can be that any job can feel that connection, can feel like I'm making a difference in the work that I do, and I'm helping this organization be successful. And I think that's a part, right? Is that connection to purpose. But I think another connection is around to the people around them, right? How they feel like we're doing this together and you all matter to me. And that's really what it's all about, right? Is feeling a sense of purpose and connection in life, really.
So this has been fantastic. I really appreciate you walking through these concepts and the research that you and your team are doing. Would you take just a few minutes just to wrap up with some of the key themes that we discussed today?
Absolutely. So the first one I'd say is just this idea of what is employee engagement? Let's move away from job satisfaction. Let's really start talking about that connection, that sense of purpose, and this idea of extra energy and commitment. The next one is the great companies are really those who don't just skip to engagement, but they also focus on well-being, that at their heart, at their core, they authentically care about people as people. And then organizational support, you could think of it as a tool, right? Think about all those different 8 components that I went over fairly quickly, but how do you use those different levers to make this feel very authentic and to make it feel
Fantastic. So just some of the quotes here that really big takeaways for myself as well is that just any role can show those high levels of engagement. And when we talk about these concepts of burnout, you have to be engaged first, right?
Absolutely. You have to feel that feeling of connection and that you just care deeply, right?
Sure. So really appreciate, once again, you taking the time to walk us through those concepts and really bring it to life as well. And now we want to open it up for questions. And I know that there are already a few questions in the chat box here, but great opportunity to learn from Laura as well here. So first question for you, Laura. When you really can't control salary, what are some ideas to motivate and really ignite your staff?
Yeah.
Great question.
I think it's a really important point to know. And, there is a role for compensation and salary. You probably heard this idea. It's sort of like a hygiene factor. If people really aren't making enough money to even pay their bills, that they're distracted by, how hard their financial situation is, that's a tough spot. But if there's a baseline kind of acceptance or satisfaction with compensation, then you absolutely can be focusing on really important ways of thinking about the jobs that people have. And so where I would probably start is think about the concept of purpose and think about how every employee in your organization, how do they fit into your overall company's purpose? One of the kind of fairly simple way of talking about this is a line of sight exercise. And it's just the idea of having a manager sit down with the employee and say, let's talk about your work and what you do every day and how it makes a difference to our team, how it makes a difference to our department, and how those things ultimately roll up to making a difference for our company. So having that conversation help people really see that it's about the employees. And without them, there's no way we could do these things. And how we come together and do this work is how we're going to be able to be successful. So getting managers to talk to employees about, no matter what kind of job, that it matters. So that's one place where I'd go, is having those line of sight conversations. Another place is just this idea of autonomy. It's a tough conversation in lots of organizations that do you really trust your employees? And do your employees trust you as an organization? There's this idea of reciprocal trust. And we found in some of the research that we've done in Limeade Institute that that's critical for organizations to really support well-being and engagement, is to have that trust in place. And so I hate even saying the word let, but do you have it so that your employees are able to make decisions in their jobs? Do they have to go through a ton of, red tape, a ton of hoops to go through to just do their basic day-to-day work? Can we reduce some of the crazy approvals that we have in organizations? And we really work to give people more of a sense of autonomy. And then I probably end with the idea of growth. How do we get people to try something new? Do we give them stretch assignments? Do we give them, ways that they can learn new things? Because that also is exciting, right? That creates that energy.
Sure. So it can be done. What would be your advice to elevate the well-being discussion to a strategic level in order to avoid siloed initiatives and start a true organization-wide program?
Yeah, that is such a great question. So where I would start is, what are your business goals? I think the more we can attach people and caring about people to your business goals, the more successful you're going to be. So if your business goals are, something about, your customers, or if your business goals are something about, innovation, how do you attach caring about people to that? And so that's really important. And so that's where you can call on existing research. There's actually a lot of empirical evidence that there's a statistical connection between well-being, engagement, and business results, as I've said before. But you can also do your own studies. You can do your own research. And then you can also think about working with, companies that understand how to make those connections and how to show those. So it's really, I think, important for you to connect any program, really, but this particular kind of approach to well-being and employee engagement, really attach that to what matters to your business.
So another question we have here, usually engagement and well-being at work is most impacted by whether one works for a jerk. You know that we explicitly have a no jerks hiring policy here at Limeade as well. So how does an organization make managing about more than hitting one's numbers and change how they are evaluated?
Yeah, absolutely. I think more and more organizations understand that managers are actually the linchpin of anything that you're trying to do in an organization. And if you don't have managers who are great interpersonally, who authentically care about people as people, you're going to struggle in this space, and you're going to struggle in a lot of other spaces too. So you absolutely have to be thinking about the hiring of those managers, finding people who aren't just good, really good at a technical job that they manage, but people who really have the competencies associated with, being an amazing manager. So there's the hiring part, but then there's the development part. And that's something, that we've tried to do here at Limeade is really think about, how do you set the expectation with every single manager that, no, we want you to care about our employees as people. We want you to talk to them about their well-being. We want you to really go, take the extra steps and really create a great experience for them. That's your job. So I think it's really important for us to be, thinking about managers as it's just a different kind of job than maybe we've thought about it in the past. It's more about just being really good technically. I know this is a struggle a lot of organizations are really trying to tackle.
Sure. So one more question here. How do you measure engagement at work?
There's actually, again, a ton of research around how to measure engagement. There are things that we call outcome variables, like a question around, personally, I feel engaged in my work. That's a kind of an outcome variable. You can look at things that are related to recommending your company is a great place to work is usually associated statistically with employee engagement. But what I really like to get to are the drivers. Those things, that list I went through before. You want to get to the things that you can start to affect to be able to really have an impact on employee engagement. So there's a ton of existing research. You can, look it up on the internet around statistical drivers. I absolutely think you should do that, start there. And then really question, if you've been doing a survey for a long time, is it a job satisfaction survey? Are you really getting to energy and purpose and feeling valued and feeling supported? Because those are the things that get to true employee engagement.
I think we could probably have a 3-hour session
completely
on Q&A here with you, but thank you everyone who attended the webinar today. We hope that this has been valuable, that we're bringing up some new concepts for you, and apologies if you did not get your question answered here, but one way that you could get your question answered in person is through our Limeade Engage conference that we have coming up April 18th and 19th. Last year was a fantastic event. I know many of you on the webinar attended. We're really looking forward to hopefully seeing you in Savannah, Georgia this year. Amazing, beautiful, creative city that we hope is going to be the perfect backdrop for some of the things that we're talking about. So all of you currently on right now will be receiving a follow-up email with the slides and the recording, as well as a link to register with a discount code for Limeade Engage, and for our new webinar next week, where we'll be talking about our new products around engagement and around inclusion, how we bring that life to an organization. So we hope to see you all next week as well. Thank you again, and hope you have a great day. Thank you, Laura.
Thank you.